Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
It was a guilty verdict in the trial of Randon Wilkerson for the death of Delmar Police Corporal Keith Heacook. We'll have an exclusive interview with Wicomico County Sheriff Mike Lewis. Mayoral candidates clash and debate over the future of Salisbury, and we take a look at the dynamics of the latest clash between Hamas and Israel. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. We now turn to Susan Canfor, reporter for Coastal Point. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Don.
So, Susan, I want to first turn to the verdict in the trial of Randon Wilkerson, who was convicted on 16 counts of the beating death of Delmar Corporal Keith Heacook. After the verdict was read, his sister Anita said that she believed that justice had been done. Meanwhile, Wicomico County Sheriff Mike Lewis, who arrived on the scene actually that morning after being notified, had this reaction to the verdict.
Obviously, you're thrilled to death anytime you hear a judge read each individual count followed by guilty. And I heard that in 15 or 16 counts read out by the judge. So this brings much needed closure, not just to the family, but to the law enforcement profession. And I was asked, do I think justice was served? The only justice for this man would be the death penalty.
So, Susan, give us a sense about the background on all of this.
Yes, Don, the 32-year-old man charged with killing the corporal, Delmar Police Corporal Keith Heacook, in April 2021. He was in Sussex County Superior Court early this week. Randon Wilkerson was found guilty of first-degree murder and all related charges, 16 charges in all, like the sheriff said, on Monday. Corporal Heacook was beaten to death with his own baton as well as with a handheld dumbbell. And Wilkerson was also found guilty of kicking an unconscious Heacook and stomping on his head until, Sheriff Lewis told me, until his face appeared to be pulverized and he was unrecognizable. That early morning when Corporal Heacook responded to a home in Delmar, because Wilkerson, who was under the influence of a mixture of drugs and acting aggressively, was scaring the residents of the home, the corporal responded alone. The Wicomico County Sheriff's Office was there shortly afterward, and he was attacked. Sheriff Lewis was at the courthouse, and I talked to him afterward. He was pleased, as he told you, that Randon Wilkerson was found guilty, but he said he could appeal. Randon Wilkerson, who was 30 at the time, was arrested for not only beating Heacook, who died a few days later, but also for going to a house next door and attacking a couple in their 70s. They were both hospitalized, and they survived. Corporal Heacook had been with the Delmar Police Department 22 years. He was within days of retiring. He was ready to accept a position at Salisbury University as a campus police officer there. He wanted to work there because he had a little boy, a 12-year-old son, Matthew, and he wanted his son to be able to get paid tuition there at the college. It's the education his father and his mother, Susan Heacook, wanted for the little boy. Sheriff Lewis told me that Wilkerson's toxology report, which also was read in court on Monday, showed that he had drugs in his system all at the same time, including cocaine, crystal meth, fentanyl, and marijuana, all in his system. The Sheriff Lewis said he's afraid that he's going to plead not guilty and appeal and say that it was only the fault of the drugs, that it wasn't him that killed Corporal Heacook. He said he has a right to an immediate appeal. It could be, Don, that he will appeal. Judging from the experts I've talked to, that Wilkerson will appeal, and the experts say that the experts say that he might say, as I said, that the crime was the fault of the drugs and not him. So we'll see how that turns out. Meantime, he's scheduled to be sentenced on December 8th. Even if he does appeal, that sentencing date stays at December 8th in Superior Court in Sussex County.
So he's left, obviously, behind a family. What do we know about the reaction?
Well, Sheriff Lewis told me that his wife was in court. His wife, she said, did not comment at all, but she was crying, of course, as they showed the footage. Just terrible footage of the way he looked and, how he was beaten and unconscious and never really came back to life. He was probably brain dead right there. He was taken, I think, to shock trauma in Baltimore and died a couple of days later. His wife did, 2 or 3 days after the attack, his wife did post something on Facebook. This was 2 years ago when it happened. And she said, why was my husband allowed to go to respond to that house by himself? Why weren't there two people in that police car? So she was calling for changes at the Delmar Police Department. so that, no officer ever responds by himself. So that's one thing she did say. And she also said, she has to raise this little boy alone now. And from what I understand and what I remember, because I covered the funeral as well, they had such an incredible love story, he and his wife, and they were very romantic with each other, very tender with each other. And they had this little boy kind of later in life. I think he was in his 40s when the little boy was born. And it was just a perfect American family, if there's anything like that still exists in this country. So it makes it even sadder. She, of course, was just devastated. And the family has been supported by the community. The community has really rallied around them and tried to help the family recover. But of course, she's still just lost without her husband and the father of the little boy.
There was also a mayoral forum here in Salisbury, matching up the Salisbury City Council member Megan Outen, local property owner Randy Taylor, and community activist Jermichael Mitchell. Before we get to some of the sparring, how did you see the differences with the candidates?
Well, the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus was discussed at the mayoral forum, and Ms. Outen said she isn't in charge of that organization, but she is endorsed by it. Meantime, the chairman of that organization, Jared Schlabwain, I think is the correct pronunciation, he issued a statement apologizing for comments that were made recently that he said might have been offensive not only to Mr. Mitchell, but also to the LGBTQ plus community. Overall, I think the three of them did a good job. They answered questions from the panel. This was this past Tuesday at Salisbury University. Randy Taylor is a banker. He's one of the candidates. He didn't seem to be as strong to me as Jermichael Mitchell. Jermichael Mitchell has been involved with the town. He worked for a department in the town of Salisbury. He's worked with youth all his life. He answered the questions in a very thoughtful manner. He talked about working together, and he talked about things that are important in the community, like things like when those who don't speak English as a first language go to apply for jobs in the community. When they go to fill out an application, traditionally the applications have been in English only. So he said they should be in Creole, and they should be in French, and they should be in Spanish, because if you can't talk to these people, they can't apply for a job. So you can see through his answers, his thoughtfulness, and his desire to truly be a community advocate, either as mayor or working in some other way in the town. I was very impressed with him. He's an impressive young man. He's well-spoken. He's polite. He answers the questions. He stays on the subject. Megan Outen is the third candidate. She, of course, is on the city council now. She talked a lot about her ability I think she works with wind energy.
Right.
She talked a lot about her ability to manage people and to bring people together. She wants to be a mayor who brings people together. She talked a lot about Salisbury University, about the students there, getting them back together again with the clubs and organizations that they were active in. She said after COVID, a lot of those organizations just fell apart. When the students came back, they had other things to think about after the school was closed for a while. And I think the students were mostly taking classes by Zoom, if at all, during the height of COVID. And a lot of those things just fell by the wayside. Of course, it's important for those students to be involved in these things because it helps them be stronger citizens once they graduate and go out into the world. So she talked about that. She seems to be very dedicated, very, very sure of herself, very strong candidate. She did she did mention that she was sexually assaulted, which, as you and I talked about, was a surprise. Nobody, I think, had heard about that before. But I think it shows that she understands what women go through, and she understands that women have to be strong and stay together and fight these kinds of things that are terrible things, of course, in our society. So she was a strong candidate, too. All three of them answered the questions well and stayed on target. There wasn't any terrible arguing. They did bicker a little bit about the caucus between Randy Taylor and Megan Outen. But they seem to get along pretty well. Everybody seems to do a good job. And the moderator was Hannah Caccini from WNDT TV. She kept them on track. If they got the least bit off, she brought them right back to the subject. So I think overall it went well. I'm interested to see what the voters will do when they vote for the next mayor.
Now, as a matter of fact, I want to take a look at a couple of spots that we've been talking about. One, of course, was that question I think that stopped many in the tracks, which was the question that came about the 2 DUIs that Outen had received when she was in her 20s. And here was what her response was.
I am one of the 5 women who are going to be experiencing sexual violence in their lifetime. And it was a rather dark moment of my life, and I am immensely proud of the hurdles that I overcame as a woman And I'm here to just tell other women here that they can take a moment of your life and they're not going to steal your future. I have done my best to show a track record for myself as a leader. I think what I have overcome has made me more compassionate, and it has allowed me to see the hurdles that so many women and individuals who experience sexual violence in their lifetime, the hurdles that we see, the hidden barriers that exist for women in our communities, and the lack of resources that exist.
It seems as if there was almost a dead silence and people taken aback at something that I don't think had been, at least from my knowledge, been discussed before.
Yeah, I was taken aback too, and I think a lot of people in the audience were. You're right. There was a sudden silence in the audience when she said that. She seemed to be drawing some connection between that sexual violence and the DUI. I'm not sure exactly what that was, and I think she'll be asked about this further during her campaign. But she was asked specifically about having DUI convictions, not just charges, but convictions. But they were a while ago, Dawn. One was in 2014 and one was in 2020. And when she asked about them, she said it was not a proud moment in her life, and of course she was sorry for them, and she's ready to move on. But I think we'll definitely see more questioning by reporters and people in the broadcast industry, newspaper reporters, radio and TV, asking her more about this, not only because it's of interest to people what happened to her and how she survived it, but also because she can be a real advocate to help other women who have gone through this. And I think we're going to see a whole community of those who have been abused and attacked turning to her, as somebody who's a leader in this area who can help with resources and help them lead better lives.
Then, of course, we had this dust-up over support from the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus for Oughton and a sort of a fiery exchange with Taylor. Here's how he sort of led into it.
It would be my preference, just like Joe Michael
I will
was
say
saying.
right now that I am not the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus.
Well, you've
That is
got
all
to
I'll say right now. I'm not the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus.
Right.
Nothing has come from my campaign. I have approached this campaign with respect and decorum.
I agree.
I have no authority over the organizations that exist
Well,
in this city.
Let me just say it this way. You've given to their campaign. I've got your contributions. And secondly, they sent out a mailing on your behalf.
So how did you see her handling this question?
I thought she handled it very well. She immediately defended herself, and he was kind of Mr. Taylor was kind of brought back by Hannah, who was the moderator, who said that wasn't the question. You kind of got off course, and we want to bring you back to the question. And when she said that, the audience applauded. But what he was trying to say, I think, was that he wanted her to, and everybody, to get along well during the campaign. And one of the things he said was that he was accused during this mailing. He said there was a mailing from the Progressive Caucus, which supports her, and which she admitted supports her, it has supported her campaign, and that he was called a slumlord. So I guess he owns property and rents property in Salisbury, and he said that he asked some of his people who rent from him, and they said, if you're a slumlord, we want more like you. So he was trying to defend his reputation, and she immediately said that wasn't from her. If the Progressive Caucus sent something out, it didn't come from her. And he said he understood that, but he would like everybody to work together and work more closely together and not have things like that mailed out. So I can see both sides. I understand as a candidate, he doesn't want to be attacked, but I don't think he should have directly blamed her.
The other thing, as Mitchell himself, I guess, complained apparently about some derogatory terms, I guess, things that had been said about him. And then he went on to explain the gun charge that he pleaded guilty to. What's the story behind that?
Yes, he said that he was, I guess he was trying to clean or somehow work with he said his weapon, so I don't know what kind of a gun it was. If it was a pistol or rifle or what it was. But he said it was an accidental discharge, and he said it happens a lot, and he pled guilty. And, he said accidental discharges are very common. But one of the problems was, I guess, when the weapon or firearm discharged, it discharged very close to a neighbor who was feeding her child. So that made it even more frightening. But he did apologize for it. He said it was certainly unintentional, and it was something he took responsibility for and pled guilty for. So it's. I hope it's not too bad of a stain on his record, because, as I said, I'm impressed with him. It's certainly not something we want a mayor or anyone in the community to be doing, but these things do happen, and when he takes responsibility for it, and it's in the past. Again, it was a couple of years ago. Then I think we have to put that in perspective.
The other thing it seems to me about Mitchell is he seemed to sort of stay above the fray. He was sort of this man of goodwill. Here's one of his Closing remarks.
If I'm not your candidate, I encourage you to still make sure you go vote. Use your voice, use your power, because voting is vital and important. But if we win on November the 7th, it's very vital and important that you understand we aren't against anyone up here. We truly believe working with these people would be vital and important for the city. It would be vital and important with their information. Mr. Taylor has tons of financial information that could definitely be utilized and helped. Ms. Houghton has tons of great ideas that also could be utilized in our city administrative positions. We truly believe that we could still work with these people when we win. We encourage you November 7th to go out. You've heard our stories, you've heard our visions.
It's almost as if he was sort of staying above the fray, as I said, not attacking anyone in particular, certainly distancing himself from the exchange we just heard a moment ago between Houghton and Taylor.
Exactly. He did distance himself. He is very much a man of dignity. He seems to be a fine young man. You can tell a thoughtful young man and the way a young man is raised by his words and his philosophy. And as the forum ended, he not only encouraged everyone to vote, even if they don't vote for him, but he included the other two candidates and said if he wins, they have knowledge and intelligence and experience, and they could be part of helping the city run better. So he was very inclusive. And that's how he is. If you talk to him, and I've talked to him many times over the years, he's just a thoughtful young man. He's inclusive. He listens when you talk to him. He doesn't attack anybody. He's the kind of person who would do very well as a department head and certainly as mayor. So I was impressed with him. And I think the audience was too, judging from their reaction to his questions and his answers. I think they were impressed with him as well.
Susan, I want to turn to Millsboro, and they're looking at redistricting. What's at issue there?
Okay. Don, the Millsboro Town Council is likely to talk about adjusting the size of voting districts at future meetings. Mayor Jim Kells told me the goal is to keep the population of each district close to the same size. Right now, District 3 in Millsboro, and Millsboro has 3 districts. Right now, District 3 includes the very heavily populated and quickly growing Plantation Lakes residential community. That means that district with Plantation Lakes in it is the largest of the 3 voting districts, and it creates an imbalance. But before the districts can be changed, the Delaware State Legislature has to take steps to approve it, and the Millsboro Town Charter has to be changed. So this isn't something we're going to see happen immediately, but we will see it discussed at future Millsboro Town Council meetings. And they meet on the first Monday of every month at 7 o'clock in Town Hall in the town of Millsboro. So we will see this happening, and I think we'll see it change. It just won't change immediately.
We were speaking with Susan Canfora. She's a reporter for Coastal Point. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Guilty on all 16 counts, including first-degree murder. That was the verdict handed down this week against Randon Wilkerson in the death of Delmar Police Corporal Keith Hecook. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. It had been almost 2 years since the incident that led to his death, and it took only 90 minutes to convict. Hecook's sister, Anita, declared that justice has been done and hoped that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Wicomico County Sheriff Mike Lewis recalled being pulled out of bed by the news of the shooting on that Sunday morning. We talked with him about his reaction to the verdict. Let me first of all ask you what your own reaction was then to the verdict.
Well, the Attorney General called me last week, and I was well aware that they were going to plead not guilty, but they were going to agree and stipulate to a statement of facts which would be read out loud to the judge. I was still asked to be there. I'd received a subpoena to be there. And obviously, you're thrilled to death anytime you hear a judge read each individual count followed by guilty. And I heard that in 15 or 16 counts read out by the judge. So this brings much-needed closure, not just to the family, but to the law enforcement profession. And I was asked, do I think justice was served? The only justice for this man would be the death penalty. I would love to see the state of Delaware reinstitute the death penalty, even though there's been no official abolishment of the death penalty in the state of Delaware. It's been a decade since the death penalty was carried out. Maryland, on the other hand, did officially abolish the death penalty in 2013. Sadly, they did that. There must be some type of deterrent for those who would kill a uniformed law enforcement officer in the performance of his or her duties while these duties are being executed in the public every single day. This man was honorably serving his community. He responded to an unknown complaint at this location, and not only did he lose his life, Don, but his head was bashed in by the suspect, who not only killed him but then stomped on his head. And all that came out in the courtroom. I was certainly well aware of it, and I had watched the body-worn camera footage many times, but it clearly resonated with the judge in his assessment of what he saw, in his assessment of the police officers, how they performed heroically on the scene that particular day. And the judge actually said Wycomico County and the state of Maryland should be very proud of Deputy First Class Houck, who assumed a leadership role at the scene of that incident on that particular day, April 25th, 2021.
I want to take you back to the day when you heard about the incident. Where were you? How did you find out about it? So what was your reaction? What was going on?
Don, I was home on an early Sunday morning in bed with my wife when one of my commanders called me and said that a Delmar police officer had been beaten severely, and it does not look good. As I kept him on the phone, on the speakerphone, talking to him, I was up, I was getting dressed, and he said, "Boss, I just got a text from someone at the hospital. It appears that he did not make it." As you well know, if you or anyone had watched the body-worn camera footage, my deputy on the scene said multiple times to the Delaware State Trooper, Jimmy Wharton, who entered that house with him. Jimmy kept my deputy covered with a 12-gauge shotgun. My deputy had his service weapon out, and when they went in, you would hear my deputy say on the body-worn camera multiple times, "He's gone. He's dead. He's gone." And the deputy and other first responders, especially Ashley Little of the Laurel Police Department, they simultaneously performed CPR on Officer Hecook, and they did all they were trained to do and all they could do within their power to try to put air back in his body before he was transported by ambulance. And again, to see all that unfold in a courtroom, I was seated directly behind the surviving spouse of Corporal Hecook. His wife sobbed the entire time and was consoled and comforted by those next to her, those behind her, and those in front of her. But you could clearly hear gasps in the courtroom and sobs in the courtroom by those who were forced to watch this body-worn camera footage if they chose to remain in the courtroom. The judge warned all of them it was going to be very graphic, and if you want to step out, you can. Not one person left that courtroom. Everyone sat in there and watched it as it unfolded on April 25th, 2021.
When you were watching it, you're a professional law enforcement officer. You've seen a lot of things in your time. What was going through your mind as you watched that play out, those efforts to revive that officer?
You know, Don, what went through my mind the entire time, first of all, I was seated right next to Deputy Mike Howe, the deputy who was on the scene that morning, who actually grabbed Corporal Hecook with his left hand while keeping his service weapon in his right hand trained on the house as he pulled Officer Hecook across the living room floor from the dining room area, across the threshold of the front door of that house, across the front stoop, down the steps, across the sidewalk, and out into the front yard, all with one hand. This deputy pulled Corporal Hecook. And all I could think about, this is the reality that we face today. And while tragically Corporal Hecook lost his life that day, I also lost a Wycomico County Sheriff's deputy who was on the scene who could never return back to work. Delaware State Police Corporal Jimmy Wharton never came back to work. And these are the realities that we face as law enforcement executives every day, the men and women still performing heroically. And to the judge's credit, that judge sat on that bench yesterday and said many laudatory and complimentary comments regarding law enforcement and the difficult challenges they face today. And it was so refreshing to hear a judge sitting on a bench say that to everyone present in that courtroom. Kudos to the judge in Georgetown Superior Court.
Now, apparently this was not the only action that Wilkerson took. He also beat up an elderly couple, although apparently he did not kill them.
He beat them severely. I was on the scene of that incident that morning as well. I walked across the street. I then went to meet with those individuals later that day. And the 73-year-old man, a former Marine, I might add, absolutely did everything in his power to save not only his life, but the life of his wife. He actually gouged the suspect in the eye with his thumb. and he tried to choke him out. And miraculously, the suspect had enough, stood up, and calmly walked out the front door of the residence. Only by the grace of God did that elderly couple survive that unprovoked attack on them in their home. That's their sanctuary. That's their castle. He literally knocked on the door. They believing he needed help. Opened the door. He came in and attacked both of them and nearly killed them.
In terms of sentencing, obviously the max would be life in prison without parole, I assume. What do you make of that and the fact that, as you say, you don't think quite justice has been done, but I guess there's at least some?
Well, I certainly applaud the Attorney General's office in Delaware. I applaud the prosecutors. There were 3 prosecutors sitting at that table who had prepared this case for trial. I applaud their efforts, extremely laudatory of everything they've done. But I also am equally proud of the judge and how he conducted himself on the bench yesterday. His comments that he made to everyone present at courtroom yesterday, I realize a lot of judges have a difficult job as well. I think the judge is going to give him the maximum sentence that he can give them by Delaware state law. But deep down, we all know that this suspect needs to die. He has no redeemable qualities about him whatsoever. He's not remorseful for what he done. He's only remorseful that he got caught. He's not remorseful at all. Therefore, in my eyes, he should face death and nothing else but death. I wish we had a firing squad. I wish we had execution squads. When one is sentenced to death in this state, in the state of Delaware, in the state of New Jersey, anywhere in this region, that it be carried out within hours, not days, not weeks, not years, but within hours. That's what we expect from our judicial system. That's where we should be today. But unfortunately, you and I both know that ship is long sailed and we'll never see that back again.
In terms of your folks, your deputies, how are they reacting to what's happened, obviously, over the last couple of years? And perhaps do you have any sense about how they're reacting to the verdict?
Well, I can tell you that we're all overjoyed for the family of Corporal Heacook. We can finally put this chapter behind him, especially the sentencing is coming up on December the 8th. I will be in the courtroom on that particular day. I wouldn't miss the opportunity to be there to support the Heacook family with all they've been through. But I can tell you, the unprovoked attacks on law enforcement across this country, particularly 2 police officers being killed within 14 months of one another, in Wycomico County and Delmar, Delaware. Think about this. Within 14 months, it's had a dramatic impact on the lives, both professionally and personally, of those still serving our communities every single day.
One of the things that the Judge Harness said was that at least Heath was around people who cared for him in his last moments.
Absolutely, and that made me so proud. And I got to tell you, the family members came up to where I was standing, and I had Deputy Houck standing next to me. And they were collapsing in his arms because they knew the vital role he had played in the final minutes of Corporal Heacook's life. But it was clear that Corporal Houck and Officer Ashley of the Law Police Department, it was those 2 who performed CPR simultaneously on Corporal Heacook, tried to keep him going, talked to him the entire time, telling him it's going to be okay, talk to me. They did an incredible job. But I think when the judge realized just how very difficult our jobs are today, and to know that Corporal Heacook, his family could be reassured that he had someone who cared about him in the final minutes of his life, it was pretty powerful to watch.
Wycomico County Sheriff Mike Lewis on the guilty verdict handed down in the trial of Randon Wilkerson for the death of Delmar Police Corporal Keith Heacook. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.